they were chosen for retirement because of these kinds of things. They all suffered terribly. They didn't bounce back after a study. I mean, we're talking about Jethro, but I actually have here that he had, by the time he was 7 years old, even though he really was still in junior Africa or in the nursery a lot, by the time he was 7, he'd had 142 knockdowns. Regis, another incredibly sensitive, loving, loyal to Jethro type of guy. He's creative. He's musical. He's a special guy. Also darted over 200 times by the time he was 7.5, 8 years old. Darted and knocked down. So those are the reasons they don't bounce back. Those are the reasons they are ruined for life. Those are the reasons why they're traumatized and you know, they miss the things that they miss. Even in, well, although now in their new life, that group is doing amazingly well. They are like a family. They're happy to be with one another. They love to be with one another. They're basically the core group, the strong family, solid group at Fauna, because they were in the nursery together. Others, the other folks that we haven't addressed yet, and we will address that right now, ex-entertainment individuals, people, chimpanzee people who were in circuses, were in roadside shows, or roadside sidekicks. They're called sidekicks. That's the way. That was the new word I found out. I thought we had always been told that Billy Joe and Sue Ellen were in the circus for 15 years, when in actual fact they were considered sidekicks. So they just got to go to fairs and events and shopping malls and just, you know, have pictures taken with people and so on. And the eventual plan for them was to be bred. They were supposed to, as they're raised as brother and sister, because that's how they were raised, wearing clothes and so on. And still to this day, when Billy Joe, at 38-year-old adult male chimpanzee, he's 4 foot 5 inches tall. He weighs nearly 200 pounds. He is a stunning, majestic, incredible chimpanzee. He'll put a necklace on, a pair of sunglasses. He'll wear clothes. He'll do lip flips when he wants something. He'll do handstands when he really wants something very badly. It broke my heart the first time. I know we provide those types of things for enrichment. Jane Goodall came to Fauna and told us, try to give them a little bit of something from their past that might make them happy, might remind them of happier times. You know, if you've been stripped of everything you've ever had, like Rachel was, of all her clothes and all her belongings, for her to carry something around with her is very precious. Sue Ellen, who was raised with Billy Joe, I mean, that little lady just loves to have a purse on her shoulder, or wear a scarf, or, you know, put a blanket over, like a cape over her shoulders. Well, you know, I'm not... It's really difficult when people come to visit and meet the chimpanzees to say, well, you know, yeah, that doesn't look right. I agree with you completely, but, you know, they're doing it. They choose to do that. And I was extremely offended one day when we had some construction guys there, and actually we asked them to leave after that. And of course, a lot of our projects aren't finished now because, you know, because I asked them to leave. Billy Joe came out wearing a beautiful Hawaiian lei that was put in one of his enrichment packages, and he thought he looked great. And he does a lot of bipedal walking. He was taught to walk upright, and he still walks upright to this day. And there he stood, so grand and gorgeous and stunning place in time. But we all said, "Oh, Bill, you look amazing." You know, he was gorgeous, and he was just, you know, it was beautiful colors. He's so black. He looked so handsome, and these men just burst out laughing at him. Well, that was a big mistake. Chimpanzees can actually, they can load up their mouth with about 2 or 3, we give them bottled water. He just filled up his mouth with bottled water. He's also HIV positive, so this gives people a real good scare too, you know, even though you don't get it that way. And there's another really cool trick they have. It's something that it's basically something they learn in the laboratory as a way of getting attention, but it works pretty well. You can actually defecate in your hand very discreetly. I mean, I'm not trying to tell this as this is a very funny story, because when he sat there very discreetly, you wouldn't have known it was happening. I knew his mouth was loaded up with water, but they couldn't tell because he was doing this swaggering, and they had no idea what was coming. These 5 guys just standing there laughing at him and, you know, making all these silly comments. Well, within 2 seconds, that water came shooting out, and it spread across, and every one of them was soaked, and then so did this nice warm brown stuff. It was like a moment, and there they ran. They left, and they didn't come back. We actually asked them not to come back, but that's actually how Billy was treated a lot in the lab. Billy had the reputation of being an alpha male, but how can you be an alpha male when you live alone in a cage? You're alpha what? Alpha of what? You know, he used to be, you know, sort of taunted, and they called, I'll say the word, they called him an asshole. Actually, one of the guys that came back to visit Billy from Lemsep, who was a guy who was actually madly in love with Regis, and Regis was so happy to see him. But Regis was the only one that liked him. Billy did exactly the same thing again. And this gentleman said to, oh, well, he's not really a gentleman, this guy said to Billy, oh, I see you're still an asshole. So Billy, again, you know, now we have portholes. We have what you call portholes, so that we can place a trolley in front of the rooms, and we could put different types of food so the chimps can serve themselves. But these holes are about this big. So you can toss a soccer ball, you can toss a potato. You ever been hit in the back of the head with a potato, cob of corn, cucumber, a ball of water? Oh my God. So, you know, anybody that talks to the chimps like that, and you know, unfortunately some people, you know, that doesn't happen really very much anymore, but payback's really tough when you know, talk to the chimps that way. Billy Joe and Sue Ellen, as I said, were, you know, they were these little sidekick chimpanzees. They reached 15 years of age. Brothers and sisters in the wild, theoretically and normally, don't have sexual intercourse. Chimpanzees, at least, don't. Bonobos do, but chimpanzees don't. So that wasn't going to happen. So they were no longer useful to the gentleman who owned them. So he sold them to the laboratory. And for 15 years, they were locked in their cages at Lemsip. They were both infected with the HIV virus. And one thing I do want to tell you is that none of the chimps are positive anymore. We didn't eliminate the virus. Somehow they have eliminated the viruses themselves. You know, blood has been taken from some of the chimpanzees when they've had surgeries at Fauna, because the chimps fight. Sometimes they get ill, and when they are ill, we do take blood from them. We had 3 deaths at Fauna, and of course we checked to find out, you know, if anybody, what was going on. And as you heard, Tom was challenged in 1984 and challenged monthly for at least 1 year, and for years after that they just kept reinfecting and reinfecting and reinfecting and reinfecting Tom. And he has managed to eliminate the virus too, somehow. So that's just proof, again, that somebody's wasted an awful lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of lives. And I don't think we're saving very many lives with that particular work. I don't know what else to say now.
Well, we were talking about, as Dr. Mahoney said, that he wanted to particularly send chimps to Fauna that had been betrayed by humans twice, and that meaning that many of them had had a life in entertainment of sorts, and then were, or as a pet like Rachel was, or then dumped into research. So that was, you know, two times that they had been had by humans, and so he wanted them to at least try to get out and not have to go to another laboratory. And so some of those guys that did get out that are up at Fauna. They're just wonderful to visit. I hadn't seen them for 4 years at all, and I finally got to go up, and it was one of the most moving days of my life. I thought maybe some of the kids would remember me because I had been with them for a while, but surely I didn't think the adults, who I primarily got to work with more on a daily basis the last 6 months of being at LIMS, when I would have the place to myself at from 3 to 11 p.m., and I really got to get some of the silly work done, and there was no research going on at night, so I got to really do some enrichment and try to be there for particularly those that were really hanging on by a thread, and just have some quality time and visit. And so I'd see Jeannie, and sometimes she would be so traumatized that she'd be horizontal in her cage, and she couldn't even come forward to a 5-foot cage to see me, even though it was quiet and there was nothing going to happen, and she knew I wasn't going to do anything to her. She just sometimes couldn't do it, and you could see she wanted to, but she just was nervous, and she had a heck of a time in the laboratory, and almost didn't make it out to Gloria's because they thought she was too crazy. No, just forget about her, and she's just a mess, and she had really, even Dr. Mahoney said, had lost her mind, and she would go into a state of screaming fits, and just really just indescribable. So Gloria had to fight to get her out, and she, like Rachel, is quite fragile. But when I went to Fauna, so the kids did remember, and that was just so wonderful to know that they were that they didn't forget, and that they were happy to see me, and it wasn't scary for them, because again I was mostly their caregiver, but still you just don't know. But the fact that the adults also welcomed and remembered was just unbelievable. And then for me to then finally meet Jeannie at the end there was just one of the most meaningful moments of my life, because she remembered, but she was welcoming, but she was smiling, and she was round, and she had a full coat, and she was vertical, and wasn't laying down, and she was happy, and we just had this greatest reunion. And I was just, and first we were, be careful, you can't get her, because she couldn't have a lawsuit or have the Canadians on her back. And by the time I got to the last chimp, Jeannie, I was like just practically, climbing in with her. She was just amazing and turning inside out, and she was just wonderful. But it meant so much, because not only did she remember and honor me, but that I saw that she made it out, and those who would have given up on her, were wrong, and she's happy and living a life, and again, making steps to recovery. And Yoko was another guy in the lab that I used to visit at night, and some of the chimps, again, they'd say, look, if you're just passing through, because you'd have like 2 minutes sometimes. You couldn't, 200 chimpanzees and 300 monkeys. How do you visit them all and do work? So he wouldn't even get down off of his tire at night, and I just try to really connect and try to bring him around a little bit. What do you need? What can I do? And just a couple months of trying to just really get to know him, and he would just be like, just forget it. But one night, I'd be practically doing cartwheels, in front of the cage. All right, okay, I can do it. Here, do you want this? And one night he just stuck his toes out from this tire. These little legs. He's this little guy, and he'd look aside like, I'm really not into this, but. And he'd stuck his toes out for a tickle, and then he'd pull them back. And, you know, and that was the first time that I thought, oh my God, you know, that there's still a little spark of life left in him, because I felt so horrible for him that his spirit had been just crushed. And then he'd stick his toes again, and so we finally got a game going at, you know, at night, you know, and he'd hate to admit it. And so then I'll let you talk about when I finally get to see him.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a huge gesture from Yoko, because Yoko's a type of individual who doesn't trust anybody anymore. He stopped trusting people. He was in a circus in Missouri. He was about 8 years old when he was sold to Lemsip. Jim went to the tent and picked him up himself and brought him home back to the lab in a small crate. Yoko's had over 144 liver biopsies in the short time he was in Lemsip. In fact, he had an ultrasound done on his liver 2 years ago, because he couldn't walk. He lost the use of his legs for about 6 months. And you know, the liver is like one of the largest organs in your body, and it takes up most of this part of you. Yoko's liver is smaller than a tangerine. That's all he has left of a liver. So Yoko, like Pablo, like Annie, like Donna Ray, might not be there when I go home. That's how fragile he is. That's how fragile they all are. But for some reason, that little man is hanging on. He won't let go. He didn't have anything in the lab. He didn't have to acknowledge people. He didn't trust people. They betrayed him. They weren't nice to him. Why the hell should he look at you or acknowledge you or give you a part of his body to touch after all these things had been done to him? So that gesture, that little toe being given to Nancy for her to touch, was a huge, huge gesture. He lived with us for probably 3 years before he stopped trying to grab me. I mean, I may as well have been his worst enemy in the entire world. He actually only started to seem to like me a little bit after his recovery from his illness. But Nancy, when she did come to visit, it was really a pretty moving time, because a guy like Yoko just doesn't acknowledge anybody. I mean, I lived with him and looked after him and tried to give him what I thought was the right thing to give him, you know, and change his life and help him move along. With Jeannie, she responded, you know, pretty well to her new life. It took her a year before she'd let me touch a toe. It took 2 years before I could touch her finger. And now, today, she takes my hand and places it on her heart. So I think that's progress. She's definitely a testament to sanctuary and retirement and life after. But when Nancy came on that day, these Yoko and Jeannie, these two individuals that we're talking about right now, who really had no reason whatsoever to show any love or compassion or concern or care to anyone that had been in their life before, because they couldn't even do it to people in their lives now. Yoko came running out to the back play area, and one of the most submissive gestures and one of the most incredible things a chimpanzee who's been through what he had been through could possibly ever do is turn his back to you. And he turned his back to Nancy and backed into her so that she could embrace him. And she did. She did a stupid thing. She stuck her hands in those, we have real big holes there because we thought the chimps need to get their hands out. Well, she put her hands in and she held on to him. And it was quick, it was fleeting, but he did it. That was huge. And with Jeannie just threw herself at Nancy. It was just, you know, it was, so that's part of the reason why it's so important for us to hear the stories of what happened to them in the laboratory from the people that work in the laboratory, because they are the ones that saw it, they witnessed it, they did it. People need to hear that, and we have to work together. And somehow, however Jeannie managed to survive her time in the laboratory, however Yoko managed to survive his time in the laboratory, if it was each night waiting for Nancy to go in and say hello, even though he didn't acknowledge or care or seem to care that she was there, clearly he did. And the proof was when he had a chance. He had a whole lot. He had 9,000 square feet he could get away from her. He didn't have to go near her. He went looking for her. Jeannie, I just have one thing more to say about Jeannie, but Jeannie was pretty much the first adult chimpanzee I ever met at Lemsip. She was, on the right-hand side was a chimpanzee named Melalot, a very tall, older male chimpanzee who had absolutely not one hair on his body. He looked like a human man standing in the cage. It was frightening to look at him. He'd pulled every single one of his hairs out. He was supposed to come to Fauna. He actually never made it to Fauna. He went to the Colston Foundation and he died there. Jeannie was on the left-hand side, and there she was, this chimpanzee, bent in this position, looking at us as we entered the door, and we were all dressed in all the white suits, and of course that just set off a whole frenzy. They had no idea who we were. We could have been investigators, we could have been researchers, we could have been anything. So the whole unit just turned into, you know, a raging, blaring, blasting, angry, violent, aggressive unit. Chimps started spitting, banging, rocking, screaming. So we were asked to leave. We left. Dr. Mahoney went on the speaker and called for Mike Gordon. He said, send Mike Gordon over to unit, whatever number it was. I don't remember. All I remember was thinking, oh my God, I can't go in there. I couldn't go in, first of all, because I realized that it was us that was upsetting them, and you know, it didn't really have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. And then I thought, I don't need to go in. I really don't have to. And so the door was open, and Mike came, and I saw through the window this man, all in white, go over to the cage where Jeannie was having this breakdown. She spins, she hits herself against the cage. There was saliva just pouring out of her mouth. Her eyes literally flipped back in her head, and she still on occasion does that, but not as much as she did, urinating and defecating all at the same time. This was like an extreme breakdown, and this apparently had started to happen to her during her HIV work, and she was medicated. She was on medication, and this is what she was doing. Mike went in, this guy went in, and he just went right up to the cage, and he pressed his body against the cage, and he put his arms in there with her. And now you'd really pretty much have to be an idiot to do that, you know, unless you know that you can provide love and support and comfort to that individual. And Jeannie went to him, turned around, and just let him hug her as much as he could through the bars. He could barely fit his arms through. Eventually, there was a dead silence over the unit. There was not a sound. Then Dr. Mahoney said, you can come back in. And we really didn't want to go back in at all. We just really didn't want to go back in. He said, you have to come in. These will be the chimps that will live with you if you decide that you want to do this. And I just looked over there to the left, and there was a look in her eyes, and it was so clear and so loud that she was screaming, get me out of here. That was all she was saying. And I cried for 6 hours the whole trip home, and that was the day that we decided, and we knew for sure that there was no way that we could ever leave them there. Every chimpanzee that I met, except for Melalot, is living with us at Fauna. She's kind of my inspiration each day. I don't love her more than any of the others at all, but there's just something about her recovery, something about the time it took, something how she responded, you know, something about the fight to prove they wanted to. I respect Jim Mahoney for this. He would rather see her dead than send her to the Colston Foundation where she'd be used for toxicity testing. I totally respect his call on that. I remember the day he said, she can't go. She just isn't working out with the other chimpanzees. She can't socialize. And we went home that day and said, if we make a place for her to live alone, will you let her come? And nobody thinks that a chimpanzee should live alone. I mean, this is what we're arguing for all the time. Jeannie lived alone. for the first 2 years. And now she can go into different groups. She has a life. So she's a happy ending. And that's the kind of ending we want for all the others. And one of the things that's really very urgent for me now, and one of the reasons why I'm leaving the chimps and doing this, working on this campaign. After, it's been 8 years now, the chimps have been living with us. I thought that once the chimps moved into our sanctuary and once we started telling people what had happened to them, once we started to expose the medical files, once we started to tell people what had happened, what they'd been through, if they met them and they saw what amazing individuals they were, then all chimpanzee research would stop. That was really, 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 really kind of really stupid thinking. That wasn't going to ever happen. And then watching those ambassadors die. Just this year, Donneray leaving us was a real hit and a real reality check for me about, oh my God, we don't have a whole lot of time. You know, they're going, and when they go, who can speak for them? You know, I mean, there's not a lot of us that can get. If you have a sanctuary, you can't leave. Dr. Noon, do you think Dr. Noon can leave her 266 chimpanzees? It's an urgency now. And when Neves decided, thank God Neves decided to take this on. This is a huge, huge project. This is a lot of research. This is a lot of work. 2 years at least to prepare the website, to get the information that it would take to prove that what we're doing to chimpanzees is wrong, medically and scientifically wrong, not morally and ethically. That's what I was working on. I thought that would work. It isn't working. So people have been hired to prove that this is really bad science. And I'm so grateful to be part of the project and part of the campaign, that I'm grateful to be able to speak on behalf of the chimps. I wish they were here. I wish you could meet them in person, because I know you'd feel the same way I do about them. And I also believe, and I know that every time you hear about chimpanzees, and you will think about the individuals you've heard about tonight, but also the vision is to end research on chimpanzees. The stories we're telling, some of them are really sad and some of them are really tragic. The minute you lock someone up, their life is ruined. So that's basically, no matter what you do to them, you can put them in a cage in a zoo and their life is ruined. We're just trying to fix what's been done and stop it from continuing. And with chimpanzees, I think we can. And we got to do it really fast. And that's about it, I would think.
Yeah, and we have to do it from every angle. That's where we need everybody, you know, on the outside, inside, up, down, wherever, in politics, because it isn't going to happen, you know, overnight or fast enough for their sake. So we need people like Erica with GAP and Sin and Neves and Fauna and, you know, wherever we can get the word out. And because to trust that, you know, the oversight agencies and are making sure that research is being done in a humane way, you know, it's all a farce. The USDA and inspects and you know, everything, you know, they're making sure everything's done right. You know, it's not true, and it's so easy to get around so many things in labs, and that's even one reason why I'm a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the United States Department of Agriculture, because of the fact that even the USDA inspectors themselves said, we don't know enough. There aren't enough of us to go around and police these labs. We don't know enough about how to recognize the psychological well-being of a chimpanzee or a monkey in a laboratory. Imagine if just at Yerkes alone there are 2,000 monkeys and chimps at the behavioral field station, which isn't really a behavioral field station, so to speak, and another 12 to 1,300 at their main campus. You know, do you really think an inspector is going to get to spend time and properly psychologically assess an individual as to whether or not they're okay? And so even your own inspectors, you know, we need more specifics, because the language is, you know, it's just one page in the Animal Welfare Act that is directed towards addressing the psychological well-being of chimpanzees and primates in laboratories, and it's all vague. It just says, well, follow the, you know, what's accepted in guidelines and in journals, and the veterinarian has a tremendous amount of power to usurp that or decide that that they don't have to participate in receiving enrichment or psychological considerations, especially if the researcher deems that it would be interfering with their research, etc. They started to do a draft policy to expand this psychological enrichment for primates to try to make the laboratories a little bit more accountable and a little bit more specific as to how to address things and improve the enrichment programs in labs. And then they drafted this whole big policy, and then they didn't even finalize it or adopt it. So anyway, we have a lawsuit going against them for not even doing that, something that they deemed within their own agency as important. And that got dismissed on some obscure legal technicality, and it is going to appeal this Friday. So, you know, just things that each one of us can try to do, and writing a letter is never dumb or insignificant. So spread the word and help us out. Thank you.
We're gonna take a few questions and answers right now, if you have any. We want to make sure you have a chance to do that. So, and then we'll just wrap up and let you go home and
not without showing you four minutes of happiness.
So stick around for that.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes that will at least with a song, a nice song, and the only thing I'm going to say before that happens is the first scene you're going to see is actually the night that the first chimps that were infected with HIV virus left LEMSIP. You'll see Billy Joe. You'll see his hand slowly dropping down in his feeder box as he's been anesthetized, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd just been darted, and it was the night he was leaving for Canada. It was the night he was being smuggled out of the laboratory. And then you'll see some sort of happy moments at Fauna, because you can't leave thinking that it's all really awful and sad. There are some really beautiful, I thought this would sort of change the world, but it didn't. But it's changed their world and their life. So for 4 minutes, and then we'll answer questions. How about that?
Can we do it in reverse?
Reverse?
Just because I think it'll be nice to end with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we do some questions and answers now, and then we'll show you this? And go ahead, Lisa.
Gloria, I just wondered, when you went and saw the chimps at LEMSIP, how long after that until you got those chimps?
I heard about them in January from Dr. Roger Fouts. We called the minute we got back to Canada. We had an appointment to visit them in February of 1997. We were told we had 3 months to get them out of there. Billy Joe and Sue Ellen were the first two that Jim wanted to get out because Fred Colston wanted them really, really badly. They had to be out by June. He even actually contemplated sending them in a truck, letting them stay in the cages that they were in from LEMSIP, and living in one of our barns. And we were willing to do that because he didn't want, and we didn't want to lose them. They moved in September of '97, so we got building up real quick. That was the timeline. I met them in February, and they were living with me in September.
In the case of Colston, actually, it was a series of violations and financial problems that led to the lab closing. No, and in fact, one of the things with Dr. Jim Mahoney, which makes him a sort of mixed blessing for us, is that he will say, we don't have the right, but we have the need. So he's one of the ones who would argue that the science is necessary, even if the ethics are not. And that's why we're bringing on board PhDs, DVMs, who are looking very methodically at what has been done in research and building the arguments for why it's not necessary, has been counterproductive, and in many, many cases hasn't even been used. 45% of some 780 studies that we've already looked at never even got published. So somebody did it, they got the money, and nobody, the whole world didn't know about it. 45%. And of the 55% that were published in journals, it was 1 or 2 references in a sea of other references, including human clinical data, epidemiological work, etc. So we're going to build a scientific case, because the moral case still makes people be able to believe that the science is necessary, and it's sort of a resignation to it. We have to move beyond that. We have to move beyond that, and I think that was the point Gloria was making, that for us, for most of us in the room, the moral argument's enough.
Yeah.
But the scientific argument is what the world needs to hear. And I'll tell you the other thing, the survey we did, 39% of America are already with us on a ban. 39%. That's not small potatoes. It's not going to win the issue, but it's not a small amount of people. 18% are against us. The rest are sitting on the fence. Now, if we look at surveys done years ago, you're not going to see that. You're going to see more people against it. So we asked the question, well, what would make you likely to support a ban? And the predominant explanation for those who are opposed to a ban, you following me here? Okay? If you're opposed, you say, well, if it's dangerous, if we knew the science was dangerous to humans, then we would. So when people hear that HIV, if you tell people one thing, one scientific argument against scientific research, remember that HIV example, because it scares the hell out of people. The other thing, too, by the way, you'll notice that the slideshow said 98.4%. Well, that was before the last genome results that told us it's 96%. I said to Gloria jokingly, I said, what statistic, what percent? She said, depends on when the T-shirt was published. It's 94%, it's 98%, it's 96%.
Changes daily.
But when you get how like us they are, and yet the major differences are around immunology, which are really significant because we're using them to look at viruses, and if you get people to get that it's dangerous, that's the most important scientific argument, and we're going to make it. We are making it. We have a Jared Bailey, who's a PhD, who's from England. He's going to be coming and work, not coming physically, but he's going to be coming on board January 3rd. Dr. Andrew Knight, a veterinarian, he's done a lot of looking at it. PCRM's done some work with this. So we're building the scientific arguments, and that's what we're saying. For you, do both. Take the slideshow, show it, keep some of, you can't argue science. The other thing too is if people really try to challenge me, if I have an audience that's less, I say, you know, give me the day, give me the time, give me the area of chimpanzee you want debated, and we will bring in the experts to do it. You shouldn't be expected to be a scientific expert. That's absurd. But you can build sort of, you can make the premise. Look at this example, and that's a big one. So.
Yeah, and honestly, constantly at Fauna, I'm put in the position of making the decision between the chimps or children, the chimps and my grandmother, the chimps and my mother. That's what we're asked all the time. You know, why do I have to choose? Why do you have to choose? Well, I don't want to do it to anybody. I wouldn't want to. I don't want my grandmother to die. I don't want my nieces to die. I don't want my mother to die. I don't want the chimps to die. You know, I don't understand that kind of argument. So I don't know what to say anymore. So, you know, I'm saying to you that it's not working for me. You know, I have to defend constantly why I think morally and ethically it's not right to do this to them. So that's that.
Yeah, and Jane Goodall even says it's a silly question. It's like comparing apples and oranges. I mean, she had a son, you know, her son, and she said, you know, as a mother, even I can say that too. You would want to do what you could to save your own child. That's natural, but that doesn't mean, you know, that I would want you to lose your child over it, or you know, it's ridiculous.
It's also part of what we'll often say is, you know, our life and death does not depend on chimpanzee research. However, the life and death of certain laboratories does. And New Iberia, Southwest, Yerkes,
right.
MD Anderson, The chimps are all concentrated in just 6 facilities, really, well, federally owned chimps. Privately owned, you know, you don't really know what's going on there, but it's not too much, so don't worry too much about that. But 6 facilities, and one, New Iberia, for example, has a 10-year grant. It's 2001 to 2011, $681,000 simply to maintain the population. And that's one tiny little grant. So that's another way to think about arguing it, that this is a financial, they have financial vested interests in this, and the health is not a big part of it.
Well, I'm sure it's a very complex issue, but in terms of the chimps, isn't it the moral argument to the public? Because if their research doesn't relate to us, or the other animals relate to us even less so. So it's not like we can just go, you know, down the ladder, you know, because people who approach it from a scientific viewpoint, and they just say, well, use the other animals. But
Well, this is part of what, you know, Dr. Ray Greek, he wrote a book called Sacred Cows and Golden Geese, the first one. And we asked him to do a position paper for the website, which he has done. And he said, well, I don't usually focus species, you know, on in a particular species. And we've convinced him that if his arguments, which he can apply to a species so like us genetically, then what does it say about the use of other species? So that's when we talk about them as being ambassadors. We mean that in many, many, many levels. If we can argue what bad science chimp research is, then imagine ferrets and guinea pigs and chickens and everybody else who's being just sort of thrown in. We hear you. The moral argument is compelling for many of us, but where it won't work is in certain situations where you have to use the scientific argument. Now, what's not wrong with that? What's not wrong with that is if you can get somebody to stop eating meat because of their own heart condition, then they're more open to the moral argument. So let's bring whoever, however we need to, and then they will be more accepting and embracing of what we thought from the beginning, which is it's just wrong, so stop.
Yeah.
Somebody had a question behind. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, go right ahead.
We don't know about it at the beach on her Miami beach house. Yeah, we don't know when the first few years of her life.
I mean, I don't know how they react to others.
I could tell you a couple stories. I could tell you a couple stories.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, then maybe it's been tried.
Well, not on purpose. Chimpanzees tend to attract rats. One day I saw a real cute, really cute, very realistic stuffed raccoon. And until I got closer and realized it wasn't a stuffed raccoon.
Well, I wasn't sure if it was.
Yeah, I think it died of a heart attack, realizing, oh my God, I've landed in Africa. There was not a mark on the raccoon, honestly. The rats, though, on the other hand, I mean, they really do have a technique and a style for killing. In Rachel's situation, I mean, actually birds live in the chimp house. They fly around and do all kinds of things. Once a little chihuahua got in with the chimps. Thank God she survived. And chimpanzees at Carol Noon's place, there's dogs that run all around the place, and the chimps do have an opportunity to at least communicate a little bit with the other animals.
And there are a couple, isn't there one?
Arthur, a little guy we rescued from a roadside zoo who had been sold from Colston when Colston was going under financially. He was starting to sell babies. He and Thelma fell madly in love at first sight and just played and were friends. And
who's Thelma?
Thelma would nip. Thelma's a dog that was rescued on the heels of hunters that just showed up at Carol's, and Thelma's a part of the sanctuary down there. So it can happen, but
Yeah,
I think the point you're making is, again, historically, what kinds of comforts might work for them, and I think that's what Gloria is saying.
In her case, probably having the saddest thing I watch, even though a sanctuary that has babies is not considered a sanctuary, but the natural biological way and where all our girls would be right now they'd be moms. Mm-hmm. There's a huge emptiness in them. I watched Chance lay on the floor once with the dish mops. she flipped it up and she held it in her arms like a baby. I've seen Billy Joe with a stuffed chimpanzee, you know, those stuffed toys that look very realistic. Billy Joe's an adult male, and adult males play with babies all the time. I mean, you see it. Carol Noon had accidental births, you know, and Carol Noon has a lot of youngsters from the Colson Foundation. To watch the adult males and the females and everyone with the little kids, it's very fulfilling. It feels, and I've watched very dysfunctional chimpanzees at Carol Noon's place change dramatically since those little youngsters have been born. I don't say this is the solution in sanctuaries at all. I just think it's just part of the whole, I mean, the whole reason why the whole thing is such a mess and what we've done to them is so awful. And maybe, but she also could kill her child. You know, she's not, there's something wrong with Rachel. Yeah.
Anything else? Go ahead.
Yes. How many chimpanzees do you have, and how did you get started with having this
No background. Nope, no background. But anyway, there's 13 chimpanzees living there now. Theoretically, we're not allowed to take any more because we did something that God would think was the right thing to do, but a lot of people in our neighborhood did not think, and that was provide a home for infected chimpanzees in a rural community that has a terrible phobia to that. So for the last 8 years, that's basically what we've been fighting. And how it happened was fate and destiny. You know, I just always, that's where I'm supposed to be in life. And I don't think personally that you need to have a degree in chimpanzee behavior to work with chimpanzees. In fact, I think it might have ruined everything, because these are individuals with unique and different problems, and if I'd gone in there expecting them to be normal chimpanzees and act normally, there'd be a real big mess. What we've done and how it's worked for us is we've just worked with individuals and tried to help each individual become a better individual and let them be who they are. And everyone is, and I think that's really worked for us, and I think that a lot of other sanctuaries do it the same way. The places that end up a little messed up perhaps are zoos, where they have like real professionals. They could afford people that have all this great experience, and you know, and chimps are supposed to be chimps, but they're not chimps there either. They're not really who they're supposed to be. So anybody can do it. If you love, if you can love. Yeah. So.
Anything else? Okay, we have, I'm going to say one website again, www.releasechimps.org. It's a temporary website right now. This website is going to kill all of us, but it will be up beginning sometime in mid-February. There will be campaigns that you can participate in, because it's one thing to try to re-inspire you, because I know you're an inspired audience, but to re-inspire you around this particular campaign. And then it's another thing to have you go away and go, yeah, what do you want me to do? What are we going to do? Well, there'll be lots of things to do. So look at the temporary website, go back again in February, take as much material for your friends who couldn't make it. Anybody that you know will help spread the word, and that's a start. And now Gloria will do a very quick narration of a very, just a couple. Do you want to explain to Jane
I'm just saying
Goodall?
one thing.
What about Jane's Clyde?
Oh.
Yeah, you have to explain that. Okay, just explain that, and then we'll see it, and then that'll be it.
Yeah, no, yes. Annie and Pablo, like I told you earlier, passed away. Pablo died, and then 3 months later, Annie passed away. Pablo, we were lucky enough to actually have a pathologist do the report on how and why he died. Annie died, and no one would touch her. No one would touch her body. There was just in general in Quebec and in Canada, there wasn't. Rochelle found someone at a university in Ontario that would open her up and touch her, and I found that extremely offensive after all they had done for us. That they are so valuable to us while they're in research, but when they're dead and when they're in a sanctuary, no one will touch them because they might be infected, and now they're a biolevel 4 instead of a biolevel 2. And it was extremely offensive. Annie actually, I couldn't bear the thought of having her sent and being sawed down the middle and
because that's, I mean, we were really lucky to get Pablo back. Unfortunately, or fortunately, after the attack on the Twin Towers in New York, we had Pablo's ashes, and Dr. Goodall had offered to take Pablo back to Africa, to his home. And we tried to send Pablo to Dr. Goodall, who was in California that Christmas. Of course, Purelator called us back because there was this white powder in the package, and it was, a legitimate scare. I knew right away that he wasn't going to make it on that trip. And then Annie, we thought we were going, she died 3 months later. So, I mean, in the end, it sort of turned out okay. We had Pablo's ashes. Annie stayed in a freezer for 1 year because we wanted to try to find exactly why she died. I was told I'd given her diabetes from all the treats. We found out she had no pancreas. When Richard did the original autopsy on her, she had no pancreas. If you have no pancreas, how do you have? I didn't give her diabetes. It wasn't the treats that she got. I mean, I was accused of that for a long time. Anyway, Annie was finally cremated 1 year later, and I snuck a little package to Jane, and Jane took Annie and Pablo, and she did a wonderful and beautiful thing. She took them back to Gombe, and she sprinkled their ashes through the forest, and she actually put them in the Gombe stream, and she picked a rock from the stream and sent it back to me. So Annie and Pablo are where they belong. Donna Ray isn't there yet. She'll get to go one day. And then the video that I'm just going to show you quickly is, I was driving across the bridge one day, and I was like in one of those kind of moods, and I was listening to this radio, and Shania Twain's song came on, the one that they use at all the weddings about how you love somebody so much, and I'm thinking, oh, God, what woman loves a man that much? God, it's like, this is it's like, and I'm thinking, how could this, when you get really pukey, where you just say, what? Who could sing that to somebody? And then all of a sudden I said, oh my God, I love the chimps like that. and that was why that's why the song was chosen. It's a very famous wedding song.